Marcus Chen pulled his winter coat tighter as he stepped out of his small apartment building. The wind was already picking up, and the weather forecast had been grim all week. Snow was coming, and it wasn't going to be the gentle kind that made pretty Christmas cards. This was going to be the kind of storm that shut down entire cities. He walked quickly to his old pickup truck, the one with the dented tailgate and the radio antenna that stuck up like a metal finger pointing at the gray sky. Most people in Pine Ridge didn't know what Marcus did for a living. To them, he was just the quiet guy who lived alone above the hardware store, the one who kept to himself and didn't cause any trouble. What they didn't know was that Marcus worked as a communications technician for the county emergency services. More importantly, what they really didn't know was that Marcus had been quietly maintaining a network of emergency radio equipment that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. 3 years ago, the county had decided to cut costs by removing the old emergency radio towers from the rural areas. They said the new cell phone towers would handle any emergencies just fine. Marcus had argued against it in meeting after meeting, but nobody listened to a technician when budget cuts needed to be made. So Marcus had done something that could have cost him his job. Instead of dismantling all the old equipment like he was supposed to, he had quietly kept several key radio stations running. He used his own money to buy parts and fuel for the backup generators. Every few weeks, he would drive out to the remote locations and perform maintenance that his bosses thought had stopped years ago. The secret weighed on him sometimes. He wasn't the kind of person who liked breaking rules, even when he thought the rules were stupid. But Marcus had grown up in these mountains. He knew what winter storms could do to people who got caught unprepared. He had seen too many accidents. Too many people stranded in places where cell phones couldn't reach. As he drove through the empty streets that morning, Marcus checked his watch. He had 3 radio stations to visit before the storm hit, and according to the weather service, he had maybe 6 hours before travel became impossible. The first station was about 20 miles north, hidden in a maintenance shed behind an old fire tower. The road to the first station wound through thick forest and past small farms where people were already battening down for the storm. Marcus saw families loading up on firewood and checking their generators. Smart people, he thought. The ones who lived this far out knew better than to depend entirely on the power company when the weather turned nasty. The first radio station was humming quietly when Marcus arrived. He checked the fuel levels in the generator, tested the battery backup systems, and made sure all the connections were clean and tight. Everything looked good, but he replaced 2 small components that were starting to show wear. This equipment needed to work perfectly when people's lives were on the line. The second station was even more remote, tucked away in a small building near a ranger station that had been abandoned 5 years ago. The road was already getting slippery, and Marcus had to use 4-wheel drive for the last 2 miles. Fat snowflakes were starting to fall as he worked, not the pretty kind that drifted down gently, but the heavy, wet kind that meant business. This station required more work. One of the antenna cables had been damaged by a falling branch, probably during the windstorm last month. Marcus spent 40 minutes splicing in a new section of cable and waterproofing all the connections. His hands were numb by the time he finished, even wearing gloves. The third station was the most important one, and also the most dangerous to reach. It sat on top of Widow's Peak, a mountain that got its name from all the logging accidents that had happened there decades ago. The road was really more of a trail, and it was only safe to drive in good weather. But this station covered the largest area, including the stretch of highway where people most often got stranded. Marcus almost turned back twice on the way up. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind was making his truck rock back and forth on the narrow road. But he had come this far, and he knew this station needed attention. The last time he had checked it, 2 weeks ago, the backup battery system had been acting up. When he reached the small building that housed the radio equipment, Marcus found exactly what he had expected. The main power line was already down, probably knocked out by the wind and ice. The equipment was running on battery backup, but the batteries were old and wouldn't last long in the cold. Marcus worked quickly to install a new set of batteries he had brought with him. He also fired up the backup generator and connected it to the charging system. The generator was loud in the mountain silence, but it meant the radio station would keep working even if the storm lasted for days. As he packed up his tools, Marcus looked out at the valley below. He could barely see the lights of Pine Ridge through the swirling snow. The storm was moving faster than the weather service had predicted. What was supposed to be 6 hours had turned into maybe 2 or 3. The drive down from Widow's Peak was the scariest 20 minutes of Marcus's life. The snow was falling so hard that his headlights barely penetrated 10 feet ahead of the truck. Twice, he had to stop completely when he couldn't tell where the road was. Only the old wooden posts that marked the edge kept him from driving off into the trees. By the time Marcus made it back to town, Pine Ridge looked like a different place. Snow was already piling up in the streets, and most of the shops had closed early. The few people who were still out were hurrying toward their homes, heads down against the wind that was now howling between the buildings. Marcus parked behind the hardware store and climbed the outside stairs to his apartment. His landlord, Mrs. Patterson, was standing in her doorway, watching the storm. "Awful weather," she called out over the wind. "Hope you're planning to stay inside for the next few days." Marcus nodded and waved. But he didn't tell her that he probably wouldn't be staying inside at all. If this storm was as bad as it looked, people were going to need help. And thanks to the secret he had been keeping for 3 years, Marcus was going to be one of the few people who could provide that help. He climbed to his apartment and immediately went to the corner where he kept his personal radio equipment. This wasn't the fancy digital stuff that the county used now. This was old-fashioned analog equipment that worked when everything else failed. Marcus had been collecting and maintaining this gear for 15 years, ever since he had first started working in emergency communications. The radio crackled to life when Marcus turned it on, and he began checking in with the 3 stations he had just visited. All 3 responded clearly, their signals strong despite the storm. The equipment was working exactly as it should. Marcus made himself a cup of coffee and settled in to monitor the emergency frequencies. It was going to be a long night, and probably a longer few days. But he was ready. The secret network he had built and maintained was ready too. Outside his window, the storm was just getting started. The wind was rattling the old building, and the snow was falling so hard that Marcus couldn't see the street lamp at the corner, even though it was only 50 yards away. This was going to be one of those storms that people would talk about for years afterward. What Marcus didn't know yet was that before the storm was over, his secret would become the difference between life and death for 3 people he had never met. The network of radio stations that he had kept running against orders, using his own money and his own time, was about to prove its worth in a way that would change several lives forever. The storm raged outside, and Marcus settled in to wait and listen. Somewhere out in that white chaos, people were going to need help. And when they did, Marcus Chen and his secret network would be ready. The first emergency call came at 2 in the morning. Marcus had been dozing in his chair. The radio turned up loud enough to wake him if anything important happened. The voice that crackled through the static was young and scared. "Emergency, emergency. This is anyone out there. Please respond. We need help." Marcus was instantly awake. He grabbed his microphone and responded immediately. "This is station KD7. I hear you loud and clear. What's your emergency?" The relief in the young woman's voice was obvious. "Oh, thank God," someone answered. "My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm a nurse, and I'm stuck on Highway 45, about 10 miles north of Pine Ridge. My car slid off the road, and I can't get it out. But that's not the real problem." Marcus was already reaching for his notebook and pen. "What's the real problem, Sarah?" "There are 2 other cars here that went off the road before I did. One of them has an elderly couple inside, and the man is having chest pains. I think he might be having a heart attack. The other car has a family with a little girl who's having an asthma attack. I've got some medical supplies with me, but I can't treat them properly in these conditions." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Highway 45 was in a dead zone for cell phone coverage, and it was one of the most dangerous stretches of road in the county during winter storms. The county's official emergency radio system had been removed from that area 2 years ago as a cost-cutting measure. "Sarah, you did the right thing using your radio. I'm a county emergency communications technician. Are all the vehicles off the road and safe from traffic?" "Yes, we're all pulled well off onto the shoulder. But the snow is getting really deep, and the wind is terrible. I don't think we can stay warm much longer. The elderly man, his name is Robert Kowalski. He's getting worse. His wife Helen is trying to keep him calm, but she's scared. Marcus was already checking his emergency contact lists. The problem was that all the official emergency services were either overwhelmed or unable to reach that area because of the storm. The county's emergency management office used the new digital radio system that depended on cell towers, and most of those towers were already down because of ice and power outages. But Marcus had options that the official emergency services didn't know existed. Sarah, I want you to listen carefully. I can get help to you, but it's going to take some time because of the storm. In the meantime, I need you to tell me exactly what you have for medical supplies. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus walked Sarah through everything she could do for the heart attack victim using the limited supplies in her car. She had some aspirin, which could help with the heart attack, and she knew enough about emergency medicine to monitor the man's vital signs. The real challenge was the little girl with asthma. Her inhaler was empty, and her breathing was getting worse because of the cold air. Sarah could hear her wheezing even inside the car. While Marcus talked Sarah through the medical care, he was also working his radio equipment. The secret network he had maintained included a station that could reach the volunteer fire department in Cedar Falls, a small town about 15 miles away. Cedar Falls had an ambulance and emergency medical technicians, but they had no way to know about the emergency on Highway 45. Marcus switched to a different frequency and called Cedar Falls directly. Cedar Falls Emergency. This is County Communications. Emergency traffic. The voice that answered was tired but alert. This is Cedar Falls. Go ahead, County Communications. I have a multi-vehicle emergency on Highway 45, approximately 10 miles north of Pine Ridge. 3 vehicles off the road, possible heart attack victim, and child with severe asthma attack. Local emergency services cannot reach the area because of communication system failures. There was a pause, then the Cedar Falls dispatcher came back. County Communications. We have no record of any emergency calls from that area. Our normal communication channels with county emergency management are down. Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment when his secret might be exposed, but 3 lives were more important than his job. Cedar Falls. I am operating emergency communications equipment that is not part of the official county system. The victims are using personal radios to call for help. I can provide exact location coordinates and medical information. Another pause, longer this time. Then the Cedar Falls dispatcher said, "We'll take any help we can get in this storm. Give us what you have." Marcus spent the next 10 minutes coordinating with both Cedar Falls and Sarah. The ambulance crew in Cedar Falls had a 4-wheel drive vehicle that might be able to reach Highway 45, but they would need precise directions to find the stranded vehicles in the blizzard. The biggest problem was that the normal GPS and radio navigation systems weren't working because of the storm. But Marcus had something better than GPS. He had been driving these mountain roads for 15 years, and he knew every landmark, every turn, and every dangerous spot. "Sarah, I need you to describe exactly what you can see around you," Marcus said into his microphone. "It's hard to see much because of the snow, but there's a big rock formation on the left side of the road, and I think I can see part of an old fence line." Marcus knew exactly where she was. That rock formation was called Eagle's Rest, and the old fence was left over from a ranch that had been abandoned in the 1982. He could guide the ambulance crew directly to that spot. While the ambulance from Cedar Falls began making its way through the storm, Marcus continued monitoring Sarah and the other victims. The elderly man's condition was stable for now, but the little girl's breathing was getting worse. Her name was Emma, and she was only 7 years old. "Sarah, can the child's parents tell you if she has any allergies to medications?" Marcus asked. "Her mother says no allergies." "But Marcus, her lips are starting to turn blue. I think we're running out of time." Marcus made a decision that could have gotten him fired, arrested, or both. He contacted a helicopter service that did medical emergencies for the ski resorts in the area. Officially, civilian technicians weren't supposed to request helicopter services. Only authorized emergency management personnel could do that. Mountain Rescue Helicopter. This is emergency communications with priority medical traffic. Go ahead, emergency communications. I have a pediatric respiratory emergency. Severe asthma attack. Location Highway 45 north of Pine Ridge. Ground ambulance en route, but may not arrive in time. Request immediate helicopter transport if flight conditions permit. The helicopter pilot's voice was professional and calm. Emergency communications. Current weather conditions are beyond our normal flight parameters. However, we have one pilot on duty who is certified for extreme weather operations. We'll attempt to reach your location. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that help might reach Emma in time. Terror that he was now involving a helicopter in a storm that could kill the pilot and medical crew. But the alternative was letting a 7-year-old girl die while he worried about rules and regulations. For the next hour, Marcus became the communication hub for a rescue operation that officially didn't exist. He guided the ambulance crew from Cedar Falls through the storm, giving them turn-by-turn directions based on landmarks only a local person would know. He coordinated with the helicopter crew, helping them navigate using radio beacons from his secret network of stations. Most importantly, he kept talking to Sarah, helping her provide medical care and keeping her calm as she tried to save 3 lives with nothing but basic first aid supplies and determination. The ambulance reached the stranded vehicles first, arriving just as Robert Kowalski went into full cardiac arrest. The EMTs from Cedar Falls were able to resuscitate him using equipment Sarah couldn't provide. They got him stabilized and loaded into their vehicle just as the helicopter arrived. The helicopter landing was the most dangerous part of the entire operation. The pilot had to set down on Highway 45 inches near zero visibility, with snow swirling around the aircraft and wind gusts that could flip the helicopter if he made a mistake. But the pilot was a 20-year veteran who had flown rescue missions in Afghanistan and Alaska. He got the aircraft down safely. Emma was loaded into the helicopter and airlifted to the regional medical center, where doctors were waiting to treat her severe asthma attack. The helicopter crew also took Helen Kowalski, who was showing signs of hypothermia after spending hours in a cold car while trying to care for her husband. Robert Kowalski was transported by ground ambulance to the local hospital, where he underwent emergency heart surgery that saved his life. Sarah Martinez was finally rescued when a county snowplow reached her location 3 hours later. And normal communication systems were starting to come back online. Marcus sat in his apartment as dawn broke over a pine ridge buried under 3 feet of snow. His radio was finally quiet for the first time in 8 hours. He had saved 3 lives, but he had also used emergency equipment and resources without authorization, impersonated an official county communications operator, and violated several federal regulations about radio communications. His phone rang just as he was making his morning coffee. The caller ID showed it was his supervisor at the County Emergency Management Office. "Marcus, this is Director Walsh. I need you to come in for a meeting this morning. We've had some interesting reports about last night's emergency operations." Marcus's heart sank. His secret was out, and his career was probably over. But as he looked out his window at the peaceful, snow-covered town, he realized he didn't regret what he had done. 3 people were alive because of the choices he had made, both last night and over the past 3 years. Whatever consequences were waiting for him, they would be worth it. Marcus arrived at the County Emergency Management Office to find the parking lot full of vehicles he didn't recognize. News vans, government cars, and several trucks with communication equipment were scattered around the building. His stomach churned as he walked toward the main entrance, convinced that his career was about to end in the most public way possible. Director Walsh met him at the front door. But instead of the angry expression Marcus expected, his boss looked tired and oddly relieved. "Marcus, thank God you're here. We need to talk. But first I want you to know that you're not in trouble. At least, not the kind of trouble you're probably expecting." They walked past the lobby, which was filled with people Marcus didn't recognize. Some wore military uniforms, others had the look of federal investigators. A few were taking notes and asking questions of the regular county staff. "Who are all these people?" Marcus asked. "Federal Communications Commission, Federal Emergency Management Agency, State Emergency Services, And a few others, Walsh said as they reached his office. Marcus, what you did last night has created quite a stir. But before we get into that, I need to ask you a direct question, and I need you to give me a completely honest answer. Marcus nodded, knowing this was the moment when his secret would come out completely. Have you been maintaining and operating emergency radio equipment that was supposed to be decommissioned 3 years ago? There was no point in denying it now. Yes, sir, I have. How many stations? 3 main repeater stations, plus several smaller relay points, all powered by backup generators and battery systems that I maintain with my own money. Director Walsh leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. Marcus, do you have any idea how many federal regulations you violated? Operating radio equipment without proper authorization, using emergency frequencies without permission, impersonating an authorized emergency communications operator. Marcus felt his shoulders slump. I know, sir. I'm ready to accept whatever consequences you think are appropriate. I just couldn't let that equipment sit there unused when I knew people might need it. Walsh looked at him for a long moment, then did something Marcus never expected. He smiled. Marcus, before I tell you what's going to happen to you, I want you to meet some people. The first person Walsh brought into the office was a woman in her 30s, wearing scrubs under a winter coat. Marcus recognized her voice immediately, even though he had never seen her face. You must be Marcus, Sarah Martinez said, crossing the room to shake his hand. I can't begin to thank you for what you did last night. Without your help, I think all 3 of those people would have died. You did all the hard work, Marcus said. I just provided communication support. Just communication support? Sarah laughed. Marcus, you coordinated a rescue operation that involved 2 ambulance services, a medical helicopter, and multiple emergency agencies. You guided us through a blizzard when all the official systems had failed. That wasn't just communication support. That was a miracle. The next person Walsh brought in was an elderly woman with silver hair and bright blue eyes. She walked with a cane, but her grip was firm when she shook Marcus's hand. Mr. Chen, I'm Helen Kowalski. My husband Robert is in the hospital recovering from his heart surgery, and the doctors say he's going to be just fine. But they also told us that if he hadn't received treatment when he did, he wouldn't have survived. Helen's voice began to break as she continued. We've been married for 47 years. We have 6 grandchildren who still need their grandfather. You gave us back our future together. The third person was a man in his early 40s, with tired eyes and a grateful smile. I'm David Chen. No relation, I think. And my daughter Emma is the little girl who had the asthma attack. She's home now, breathing normally, and asking when she can go sledding again. David's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. The doctors told us that if Emma hadn't received treatment when she did, the asthma attack could have caused permanent lung damage, or worse. You and that nurse saved my daughter's life. After the 3 visitors left, Director Walsh brought in the federal officials. Marcus expected them to read him his rights and place him under arrest. Instead, the lead FCC investigator sat down and opened a thick folder. Mr. Chen, we've completed a preliminary investigation of your radio operations, and we've found several technical violations of federal communications regulations. Under normal circumstances, you would be facing significant fines and possible criminal charges. Marcus's heart sank again, but the investigator continued. However, we've also found that your equipment was properly installed and maintained, that you used appropriate frequencies and power levels, and that you operated the system only for legitimate emergency purposes. Most importantly, your actions last night directly resulted in saving 3 lives during a natural disaster. The investigator closed the folder and looked directly at Marcus. The FCC and FEMA are prepared to offer you retroactive authorization for your radio network, along with a formal designation as an auxiliary emergency communications station. This would make your operations completely legal and provide federal support for equipment and maintenance. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. I don't understand. You're not shutting me down? A new voice answered from the doorway. Actually, We're hoping to expand your operations. The woman who entered was tall, professional, and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to making important decisions. I'm Janet Rodriguez, Regional Emergency Management Director for FEMA. Mr. Chen, your unauthorized radio network performed better during last night's emergency than our official systems did. She pulled out a chair and sat down. The storm knocked out most of our primary communication systems. Cell towers failed, internet connections went down, and even our backup radio systems had problems because of the mountainous terrain. But your 3 stations worked perfectly throughout the entire emergency. Director Walsh spoke up. Marcus, FEMA wants to use your network as a pilot program for rural emergency communications. They want to fund expansion of the system and provide official training and certification for you. But I broke federal regulations, Marcus said, still not quite believing what he was hearing. Janet Rodriguez smiled. You broke regulations that were written before anyone anticipated the kind of widespread communication failures we're seeing during major disasters. Your network proved that the old analog systems, properly maintained and positioned, can provide backup communications when everything else fails. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus learned that his secret radio network was about to become very public indeed. FEMA wanted to fund 10 additional radio stations throughout the mountain region. The State Emergency Management Agency wanted to use his setup as a training model for other rural counties. The FCC was prepared to expedite all the necessary licensing and permits. Most surprising of all, the county commissioners had voted unanimously that morning to approve Marcus's promotion to Director of Auxiliary Emergency Communications, a position they had created specifically for him. So I'm not losing my job? Marcus asked. You're not losing your job, Director Walsh confirmed. You're getting a better one, along with a budget to do legally what you've been doing illegally for 3 years. 3 months later, Marcus stood on top of Widow's Peak, next to a new radio tower that was 3 times taller than the old one. The equipment building at the base had been expanded and winterized, with backup generators powerful enough to run for weeks without refueling. His radio crackled with the routine traffic of a fully operational emergency communication network. 7 stations now covered the entire mountain region, each one properly licensed and officially integrated with state and federal emergency services. But the most important radio traffic was the weekly check-ins from the 3 people whose lives he had saved during the blizzard. Robert Kowalski had recovered completely from his heart attack and called in every Wednesday to report on his progress and thank Marcus again. Helen Kowalski had become something of a local celebrity, telling anyone who would listen about the mysterious voice on the radio who had coordinated their rescue. Sarah Martinez had transferred to the County Emergency Services and was working on her certification as an emergency communications operator. She wanted to be ready the next time someone needed help in the wilderness. Emma Chen called in every Saturday morning, usually with her father's help, to practice using the radio and to tell Marcus about her latest adventures. Her asthma was under control now, and she had become fascinated with radio communications. She was planning to get her amateur radio license as soon as she was old enough. Marcus's secret had become the foundation for a communication system that now served 3 counties and provided backup support for a dozen emergency agencies. What had started as one man's quiet rebellion against short-sighted budget cuts had grown into a model program that other states were beginning to copy. But for Marcus, the most important result was much simpler. No one would ever again be stranded in the mountains without a way to call for help. The radio equipment he had maintained in secret was now part of an official network that ensured someone would always be listening when voices called out of the wilderness. On quiet nights, Marcus still monitored the emergency frequencies from his apartment above the hardware store. Mrs. Patterson had installed a plaque by his doorway that read, "Local Hero," which embarrassed him every time he walked past it. But he had to admit that it felt good to know that his secret had made a difference. The mountains were still dangerous in winter, and storms would always threaten people who traveled the remote roads. But now there was a safety net of voices and signals spanning the peaks and valleys, ready to reach out to anyone who needed help. Marcus had learned that sometimes the most important secrets weren't meant to stay secret forever. Sometimes they were meant to grow into something bigger, something that could save not just 3 lives, but many more lives in the years to come. The radio on his desk crackled with the sound of routine traffic, emergency services checking in and reporting that all was well. But Marcus knew that if the routine was ever broken by a voice calling for help, the network would be ready. His secret had become a promise that no one would ever have to face a crisis alone in the mountains again. Outside his window, snow was beginning to fall again. But this time, Marcus wasn't worried about who might get stranded or how they would call for help. The network was strong, the operators were trained, and the equipment was ready. The technician who had kept a secret through one terrible blizzard had become the guardian of a communication lifeline that would protect his community for generations to come. And that, Marcus thought as he settled in for another night of listening, was worth all the risk and worry his secret had cost him.